On Africa 24 English, the African Union Journal is presented to you by Afreximbank.
Welcome to the African Union Journal. In this edition, we focus on the challenges and opportunities of trade in Africa with a look at economic policies that promote market liberalization, the growing momentum of the African Continental Free Trade Area, as well as Afreximbank's initiatives aimed at supporting digital startups and boosting intra-African trade. More details in a moment. Economic policies play a central role in opening African markets and advancing towards effective regional integration. Despite initiatives such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, trade remains hindered by institutional and regulatory constraints. However, ongoing reforms in trade, customs, and investment reflect a growing commitment to openness, making public policies a key lever for the continent's economic integration. More details in this report by Nana Kamsu.
Despite the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is intended to transform Africa into a single market, the continent's economic borders remain largely intact. Integration ambitions continues to face challenges relating to governance and implementation, keeping intra-African trade at a low level, just 14% to 16%, compared with 60% in Asia and 67% in Europe.
African trade has grown, but still accounts for a modest share of the total trade. This gap reminds us that integration is accomplished through agreements, which must then be implemented by infrastructure, institutions, and political will.
At the same time, African countries are stepping up their efforts to mobilize more domestic resources, drawing on financial markets, tax reforms, and regional banks. This drive aims to support infrastructure financing and boost competitiveness. In 2024, intra-African trade, estimated at $208 billion, reflects a gradual improvement in trade flows, driven by greater macroeconomic stability and rising investment.
Domestic resource mobilization. It is the cornerstone of fiscal sovereignty. The African Union Commission, in this regard, continues to place domestic resource mobilization at the center of our continental agenda. We cannot achieve sustainable development or genuine economic sovereignty without strengthening our capacity to raise, manage, and retain our resources.
Structural barriers keep Africa on the fringes of global trade, accounting for just 2% to 3% of international trade. The continent remains largely outward-looking. Over 80% of its exports leaves its borders. The glaring lack of infrastructure, customs fragmentation, and the lack of industrial diversification continues to hinder the development of an integrated continental market.
Every country represented here knows what the constraints are: power, logistics, skills, finance, and governance. The difference between progress and stagnation lies in whether leaders are prepared to take responsibility for these constraints and manage them steadily over time.
With a growth forecast of 3.9% in 2025, the continent's economic outlook remains positive. Structural reforms, industrialization, and the digitalization of trade are set to accelerate the integration process. Ultimately, the AfCFTA could boost African exports by more than 50%, consolidating the emergence of a more integrated and competitive continental market.
Driven by a market of more than 1.3 billion people and the participation of 54 countries, the AfCFTA has recorded concrete progress since its operationalization in 2021, with the objective of eliminating 90% of custom duties and projecting intra-African trade to nearly $230 billion by 2026. The agreement stands as a key driver of the continent's economic transformation, despite persistent regional disparities and remaining structural challenges. Nana Kamsu tells us more.
The African Continental Free Trade Area, which came into force in 2019, has been operational since 2021, is gradually establishing itself as the cornerstone of the continent's economic integration, bringing together 54 countries to form a market of over 1.3 billion consumers. It is now the world's largest free trade area in terms of the number of participating states. Over the years, several significant advances have been made. Firstly, tariff implementation is progressing with the aim of eliminating 90% of customs duties on intra-African trade, thereby facilitating the movement of goods and services. Pilot initiatives such as the Guided Trade Initiative have enabled the testing of trade mechanisms between several countries, facilitating the first transactions under the agreement.
To tackle this challenge of food insecurity, particularly relying and invoking trade rules to lower the cost, to lower intra-Africa barriers to trade, to lower the non-tariff barriers and eliminate all of these barriers that prohibit our informal traders, our smallholder farmers from accessing markets across the continent.
According to the African Development Bank report published in 2025, intra-African trade, which has historically been low at less than 18% of the continent's total trade, is showing signs of growth, with projections suggesting it will reach around $230 billion in 2026, representing an increase of approximately 10%.
Together, we are working on developing an agricultural trade action plan, which soon the Ministers of Trade and the Ministers of Agriculture will adopt it. We will then bring it here to our heads of states for their endorsement.
However, progress in this area remains mixed, so the benefits are unevenly distributed across regions, with Central Africa lagging behind due to infrastructure deficits, limited institutional capacity, and persistent non-tariff barriers. The harmonization of trade policies and the improvement of transport networks remains major challenges to food implementation.
Reducing the cost of food insecurity, or rather reducing the cost of food, eliminating food insecurity in Africa, and enabling an agro-processing industry in the process to develop.
Furthermore, tangible progress has been made in the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which impacts are already evident on trade and regional integration. Nevertheless, the full success of this landmark project will depend on the ability of African states to remove structural barriers and accelerate reforms in order to transform this agreement into a genuine driver of continental development.
Afreximbank is launching an unprecedented accelerator program to support African digital startups and boost intra-African trade. This strategic initiative aims to remove barriers to trade, strengthen economic integration, and foster the emergence of tech champions capable of sustainably transforming the continent's commercial ecosystem. Details with Christian Belabo.
The African Export-Import Bank, Afreximbank, launched its very first accelerator program dedicated to Africa's digital trade on March 26, 2026, with an inaugural week held from 23 to 27 March in Cairo. This initiative brought together 8 startups selected from more than 1,600 applications, illustrating the growing interest in digital solutions applied to intra-African trade. The program forms part of the bank's broader strategy to modernize trade across the continent.
Through the AfCFTA, we're now connected 1.3 billion people into a $3.4 trillion market, and by 2050, 1 in 4 people on Earth will be African. This is only a blessing should our population get the right education and are entrenched in the digital future.
Designed as an intensive accelerator, the program combines an initial immersive phase with several months of support, offering startup access to Afreximbank's network, market opportunities, and key tools such as Pan-African Payment and Settlement Systems (PAPS). Among selected startups are CDL AI, which specializes in linguistic artificial intelligence, Afrex, which facilitates cross-border payments, and Ben Dada Kondia, a platform focused on market access and commercial distribution.
Africa stands at the decisive crossroad, and we are celebrating the progress, but we must confront a sobering reality. Africa's digital gap is rapidly becoming a competitive gap. Globally, 25% of trade is already conducted through digital processes. In Africa, this figure sits at merely 5%.
Although no specific figures have been officially announced, each of the startups will nevertheless receive funding of $250,000, and this initiative draws the bank's substantial financial capacity with assets exceeding $40 billion, and is part of its broader investment in trade and digitalization.
At Afreximbank, we're not just financing trade, we're building the digital rails that makes Africa trade possible. Our goal is simple: to reduce the friction that has historically made trade across African borders slow, expensive, risky, and replace it with a trusted digital environment where African businesses can discover opportunities and transact with confidence.
In the long term, the program aims to boost intra-African trade. It seeks to remove structural barriers, particularly in payments and regulation, while supporting the emergence of technological leaders across the continent. In doing so, it is expected to contribute to the implementation of the AfCFTA, digitalization of value chains, and improve financial inclusion for small and medium-sized enterprises. The ultimate goal is to strengthen Africa's economic integration and competitiveness.
News in brief. On April 8, 2026, in Vienna, the Economic Community of Central African States and the United Nations Industrial Development Organization strengthened their cooperation on renewable energy and industrialization. Togolese National Dedou Hemou has been appointed new Secretary General of the Parliament of the Economic Community of West African States. Finally, in the fourth quarter of 2025, the East African Community recorded merchandise trade reaching $42.4 billion. A look back at this event with Christian Bellobo.
Economic Community of Central African States and United Nations Industrial Development Organization have agreed following a meeting in Vienna to strengthen their collaboration. This cooperation will focus on three areas: the operationalization of the Regional Center for Renewable Energy in Luanda, the implementation of the Industrialization Master Plan, and the development of energy corridors. UNIDO will also support the first Central Africa Renewable Energy Forum scheduled for the first quarters of 2027. The administration of the Parliament of the Economic Community of West African States is entering a new phase with the installation on April 9, 2026 in Abuja of Dr. Dedou Hemou as Secretary General. The senior Togolese official succeeds Kebetin Some, who retired at the end of December 2025. With extensive experience within regional institutions, he is expected to strengthen the coordination of legislative work and the administrative management of Parliament. His appointment comes at a time of internal consolidation, with priorities centered on improving procedures and enhancing the monitoring of decisions in order to further support regional integration. The latest report from the East African Community EAC Secretariat indicates a significant improvement in the region's external trade performance during the fourth quarter of 2025. The total revenue of merchandise trade reached $42.4 billion, largely fueled by a substantial increase in imports. Exports saw a sharp rise of 37.7% to hit $77 billion, although imports also grew, increasing by 15.4% to $79.6 billion. The stronger export performance dramatically narrowed the trade deficit to $2.5 billion. This marks a massive reduction compared to the $13 billion deficit recorded in 2024, confirming a positive trend in the regional economic landscape.
Pan-African banks play a key role in trade financing and in supporting African investors in accessing international markets. Through UBA UK and the UBA Group positions itself as a strategic bridge between Africa and global financial centers, facilitating trade, risk management, and access to capital. This dynamic is part of a broader vision of a more integrated and competitive Africa on the global economic stage, a report by Sarah Yemelin.
The United Bank for Africa and its international arm, UBA UK, illustrates the growing role of Pan-African banks in facilitating Africa's access to global markets. Leveraging a network spanning over 20 African countries and major international financial centers, the group provides trade finance, foreign exchange, and risk management solutions tailored to both African businesses and international investors. This positioning is particularly strategic within the framework of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which brings together 54 countries, 1.3 billion people, and a combined GDP of around $3 trillion. Yet intra-African trade remains limited at around 12 to 15%, highlighting the need for stronger financial intermediation and connectivity.
In that sense, there is a gap to be fulfilled. And if you combine that with the fact that some of the international banks are scaling back their Africa operation, there is a much wider requirement to be filled in for a bank like UBA, which is committed to the local community and the local market. And we as UBA UK come as gateway for African corporates to meet this gap, to meet this requirement. We are focused in terms of how do we create a structured finance solution, how do we create customized solution for our client, and which risk mitigates the risk what a bank perceives in terms of transaction.
Through UBA UK, the UBA Group acts as a financial bridge between Africa and global capital markets, enabling structured financing and facilitating correspondent banking relationships. This role is increasingly important as some international banks scale back operations on the continent, leaving a financing gap for African corporates and SMEs.
We also partner with various financial institutions. We also partner with various development financial institutions. We partner with multilateral organizations to increase the ability of the group to ensure that we are able to maximize the opportunity and the potential we can offer to the African corporates and African SME to maximize their trade potential and the growth. So in that sense, while many banks locally compete for business, but globally we also cooperate. So many African banks, for example, will deal with us to ensure that their trade finance requirement, we work as a global sourcing partner for them.
Digital innovation is reinforcing this model. Through the United Bank for Africa and its international arm UBA UK, cross-border payment solutions are helping to improve trade connectivity across Africa and global markets. However, the World Bank's Global Findex shows that only about 34% of adults in sub-Saharan Africa made or received a digital payment in 2021, compared to more than 60% globally, highlighting a significant financial inclusion gap. This constrains trade efficiency, while the African Development Bank estimates an unmet trade finance demand of over $100 billion, limiting African firms' access to international markets.
UBA Group is very well committed to the agreement. We have signed a MOU with them to provide finance to SME. We have also connected the PAPS network to facilitate and simplify the settlement and payment for intra-Africa trade. We have also launched something called UBA Connect, which connects the diaspora all across our geography in 20 countries. And that's something will also eventually facilitate and help intra-Africa trade and support the growth in the trade between various countries where we are present.
With Africa projected to account for 1/4 of the world's population by 2050, according to the United Nations, institutions like UBA and UBA UK are positioning themselves as key enablers of trade, investment, and Africa's deeper integration into the global economy. Following the success of its 2025 edition, which attracted more than 600 participants, Global Trade Review East Africa returns to Nairobi, Kenya on 12 to 13 May 2026, bringing together key players in trade, supply chains, commodities, and infrastructure financing. Recognized as one of the region's leading annual gatherings, the event will once again feature essential discussions, expert analysis, and significant networking opportunities opportunities. It will bring together hundreds of decision makers from various sectors to discuss trade challenges in East Africa and propose solutions to an ever-evolving market. Participants will also have the opportunity to engage with more than 40 high-level speakers who will share market insights, innovative strategies, and practical solutions to strengthen competitiveness and improve trade flows across the region. From 23rd to 25th June 2026, the 6th African Youth Summit on the Sustainable Development Goals will take place in Accra, Ghana, in a hybrid format combining in-person and virtual participation, enabling broad engagement across Africa and beyond. This major continental forum will bring together young people, development experts, public officials, United Nations agencies, NGOs, and private sector stakeholders to address the implementation of the SDGs. The event will provide a platform for exchange, networking, and reflection on the role of youth in building a sustainable future while promoting cooperation among actors engaging Africa's development. The summit aims to strengthen synergies and encourage joint initiatives in support of achieving the sustainable development goals across the continent. The 44th Annual Southern African Transport Conference will take place from 6 to 9 July 2026 in Pretoria, South Africa, focusing on the development and sustainability of transport systems in an uncertain global environment. The event will bring together key stakeholders in the transport sector to explore ways of developing more efficient and user-oriented transport solutions. It will also serve as a platform for dialogue on the strategic role of transport in socio-economic development, as well as the implementation of public policies, sector strategies, and technological innovations across different modes of transport. Discussions will highlight the need to strengthen cooperation between the public and private sectors in order to propose concrete solutions and develop joint action plans. Over the years, the conference has established itself as a leading platform for transport policy and practice discussions.
Strengthening trade finance, supporting industrialization, and boosting intra-African trade are among the key challenges of development finance on the continent. Heading Afreximbank's regional operations in West and Central Africa, one man plays a central role in this transformation. Alain-Thierry Mbongue stands out as one of the faces of economic transformation in West and Central Africa. His profile with Sarah Ajay.
A leading figure in development finance in Africa, Alain-Thierry Mbongue now plays a central role in trade finance and economic integration on the African continent. As Afreximbank's regional manager for English-speaking West Africa and country manager for Nigeria, he has also overseen strategic operations in 7 countries, including Ghana, Gambia, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Sao Tome and Principe, and Cape Verde since 2024. Alain-Thierry Mbongue is based in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, home to flagship projects of the African Export-Import Bank, such as the African Trade Center and the African Medical Center of Excellence AMCE, the largest medical center of excellence on the continent. Alain-Thierry Mbongue supports dynamic economies facing major challenges such as access to financing, industrialization, and the strengthening of intra-African trade.
The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, represents a remarkable opportunity to transform our trade landscape. However, our success relies not only on the agreements we forge, but also on our collective capacity to produce competitively, enhance the value of our products, and facilitate the efficient movement of goods and services across borders.
Alain-Thierry Mbongue is based in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, home to flagship projects of the African Export-Import Bank, such as the African Trade Center and the African Medical Center of Excellence AMCE, the largest medical center of excellence on the continent. He is the banker responsible for major Nigeria billionaire conglomerates such as Dangote, Tony Elumelu's UBA Heirs, Access Bank, and the BUA Group. In March 2026, he recently completed the structuring of a $4 billion syndicated loan with a $2.5 billion underwriting for the Dangote Group, a Nigeria conglomerate active in numerous sectors including cement, sugar, salt, spices, packaging, energy, ports, operations, automotive, fertilizers, oil refining, and petrochemicals.
Afreximbank's mission is to promote, finance, facilitate intra-Africa and extra-African trade, and transform Africa's trade structure by amplifying manufacturing, championing beneficiation, and cultivating regional markets that can embrace what we create.
In his previous role at Afreximbank, Alain-Thierry Mbongue served as Regional Director for French-speaking West and Central Africa, overseeing 70 countries. A graduate of Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne University and Georgetown University, he embodies a new generation of African leaders who bridge international expertise with local realities. His work is fully aligned with the continent's transformation goals, particularly through the strengthening of trade corridors between Africa, Asia, Europe, and the United States.
Afreximbank has established itself as a leader in the promotion of industrialization across Africa over the past decade, having disbursed over $2 billion in debt and equity capital to support the development of industrial parks and special economic zone. In collaboration with its associate company, Arise IIP, the bank has successfully implemented 5 operational special economic zones in Gabon, Benin, Chad, Togo, and Rwanda, and is also engaged in ongoing projects in 9 additional countries.
With over 30 years of experience in investment banking, Citibank, Standard Chartered, and development finance institutions, Alain-Thierry Mbongue is actively involved in building a financial ecosystem capable of supporting inclusive and sustainable growth while strengthening Africa's position in global trade.
Thank you for watching this edition of the African Union Journal. Stay updated on all African news on our website, africa24tv.com, on the My Africa 24 app, and across all our digital platforms.
On Africa 24 English, the African Union Journal is presented to you by Afreximbank.